Hi, I'm Carolyn Jones with Washington State Children's Administration. Welcome to another workshop on the web. We have a real treat for you today. Randi Hankins is here to talk to us about the human brain, ADHD, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. This is information that is vital to you in your role as an educational advocate for the children in your home. We really appreciate the time you spend with us in training, and we also appreciate the loving care you bestow upon the children in your home. Enjoy this workshop.
Good morning. I'm glad you could all be here. My name is Randi Hankins, and what we are going to be talking about today is kind of a spectrum of things. We're going to be talking about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, what you may know as ADD, attention deficit disorder. We're going to throw a lot of initials at you today like they meant something. And then we're going to talk about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, which is that much more alphabet soup, looking at children who have been directly impacted by, we know for sure, mom's drug or alcohol use, and increasingly looking like potentially dad's significant alcohol use could also have an impact here. So we're going to be looking at kids who have some underlying brain differentials by the time they arrive into your homes. And these are going to be some of the more challenging kids in a group of challenging kids I know you are already dealing with. Now, to get this flowing today, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking to cover a fair amount of information in what I consider to be a relatively short amount of time. What we're going to hope to do here is I want you to leave with some better knowledge and some understanding of what we know about the causes of ADHD and what I'm going to loosely call FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, but we're going to use a whole lot more initials as we go here. We're not 100% certain about why certain things happen in the brain. That's still a pretty mysterious area to us, and why some people can seem to use drug and alcohol through their entire pregnancy and not seem to have any impact on the child, yet other people seem to use lightly and have huge impacts. Why in one pregnancy it seemed to be okay, in another it didn't. We don't know a lot of that information yet. This is all stuff we're still trying, and underscore trying, to figure out here. But we'll talk about what we do know about it and kind of kick that around. We'll talk some about the symptoms and the characteristics. Now, I'm a therapist, so I think in terms of symptoms. But I want to be real careful because I've been a therapist for about 30 years now. You know, I'm beginning to have my second generation of kids coming at me. It's a little scary. And in looking at that, I think we have pathologized a lot of child behavior. What used to be just kind of a quirky kid, now we have to put some kind of label on. We have to, diagnose them, write it on their forehead, and kind of, act from that as though it's not a child. So symptoms, characteristics, I want to put it more into what are you likely to see in your home and what that might mean. Because it's a real big difference if you understand kid is doing X behavior. Is he doing it to get your goat? Is he just trying to yank your chain? Or is he doing it because his brain is really working differently than yours is? Now I'll tell you, most children are capable of both pathways. And just because you might have this brain differential doesn't mean they can't spend time ranking your chain. But trying to sort out what might be the disability coming at you from what is the joy of having a child in your home coming at you. And then hopefully we're going to share together some methods of managing children in your home. Now, I got some thoughts of doing it. I have raised 3 of my own adolescents, 2 of somebody else's adolescents, and I have nature's little joke. My 10-year-old is still wandering around my home. So I have a fantasy that children do eventually leave. Now I'm waiting for my big ones to come back, which they haven't quite done yet, but they keep making threats. So I have some ideas about managing kids, and I'll share those. But I have in front of me about 30 experts of managing kids in the home, and I want to get some good interaction going between y'all of what might work, what you've tried, what you learned don't ever do, and we'll spend some time kind of sharing what can we do to make your life easier and better in your home, because you are doing, in my opinion, the world's hardest job. I discovered in raising my kids, I barely wanted to do that on some days, let alone raise anybody else's. And the fact that you are willing to do that, you stand in my respect. You know, so let me just start with that. A little bit about me. I am a child mental health specialist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work at Walla Walla College. I'm a professor in their social work program. I also am a 40-hour-a-week working county designated mental health professional, and I should be working right now. This is usually part of my shift. I have this lovely Friday morning to Saturday at midnight shift. So I get all the fun times, you know, when the kid is heaving the computer through the picture window and jumping up and down and shrieking. I'm the one that goes, oh, and then turns around and walks away. So I've got a lot of mental health experience. I got a lot of kid experience. I like doing kids, and the more oppositional they are, the better I seem to understand them. And so I think some of you have, you know, some of my budding kids coming up. A lot of what we're going to focus on is going to be kids more in what I call the latency years, kind of up to adolescence, where we see a lot of this, because it changes a great deal in adolescence. We'll also talk about that. They're like two different critters entirely. I want to give you a little introduction about what it's like to have ADHD. And in that, I'm going to read you a short little thing written by a doctor who was diagnosed as ADHD as a child and obviously made it successfully through it well enough to be an MD, but he's got a pretty nice perspective on what it's like. Then I'm going to put a quick little piece in about the brain. Now, part of this is because I think the brain is just the neatest thing, and it's something I'm very interested in, so you're just stuck. But it's also the whole basis of what's going on with these kids. The brain is simply an organ of the body. It's not remarkably different than any other organ of the body. And the fact that it lives above your eyeballs seems to frighten a whole lot of us. And when it's not wired up right, when it's not working right, neither does your thinking, your behavior, your impulse control. Now, we understand when a kid's pancreas doesn't work right and he has diabetes. We understand we have to adapt things around to meet his needs. We don't get it quite as well when it's going on up here above the eyeballs. So I want to introduce the brain to you, and I have this little puzzle that I will send about. Feel free to play with it. It's actually a whole lot of fun. And it's a jigsaw puzzle of the brain. And if you want, you can just pop out the brain stem, and then all the other pieces come out, and you can see if you can be a brain surgeon. So if you want to play with the brain, that will be floating about. But we're going to talk a little bit about how it works, how it's supposed to work, and then we're going to talk about what happens with ADHD and the fetal alcohol effects stuff. We'll be looking at ADHD from a couple of directions. I'm going to tell you what the Clinician's Bible, the DSM-4TR, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 4th edition, text revision. I knew you were dying to know that. Look, and what that does is it lists out to call somebody this diagnosis. You have to have 3 of these and 4 of these and 6 of these other things. I'm going to give you the criteria, not because I want you to line it up against your kids, but when you're talking to mythical mental health out there, they're going to be throwing words at you. I want you to be able to line up and say, do I think this is correct about this particular child? Because you're the strongest advocate for that child. You're the one that is with them frequently 24/7. Therapists have them 50 minutes every week or every 2 weeks. Schools have them 6 hours, 5 days a week. You got them all the rest of the time. I want you to be as fluent as the therapist in what is or is not happening with this kiddo. And then I'm going to introduce you to something that the mental health field is moving toward but is not got codified yet. And these are Amen subtypes. Brainplace.com that I put up on the board over there is Daniel Amen's website. He is a psychiatrist, delightful guy, who has been researching brain functioning. And he's very interested in ADHD. He's also very interested in psychopathology, career criminals, and that sort of thing. And he's been doing some fascinating imaging of the brain. And he's got different subtypes that are perhaps more functional in a way of thinking. And I've picked up some pictures directly off his website that I've stolen and I'm going to show you that show you how the brain is or isn't working. Now, part of the good thing I will say about Eamon is he has now opened a clinic up here in Washington. And we have had some success at getting Title 19 kids on medical coupons, scoped through his clinic. It's a non-painful, non-invasive, you have to lay in a tube, but there's nothing scary about it. And it's a really nice way of actually beginning to look in at that working brain. So I'll show you some of those pictures, and so kind of put in your mind, when I say his frontal isn't working, I want you to remember that picture of that nice concave spot there where nothing was happening. And then diagnostic evaluation, I've actually combined those two with the FAS. We'll move to the FASD, the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, the categories. And by the time we get to that, it'll make the DSM look real clean and real clear, because it gets fuzzy beyond belief when we start stepping into that. We don't even have yet an agreed upon nomenology. We don't know what to call it yet. But I'll give you some of the more common things you may hear. And no, we're really kind of dancing on air when we're trying to label there. Diagnostic evaluation, how do we figure this out? And there's a process. I work in the mental health system, and my system's real bad about sitting down with the kid for a 25-minute time period and coming out with a 5-axis diagnosis. That is not an accurate way to do these kinds of assessments and diagnoses. You will still find people out there who will happily do it. I want you to know what should go into one. And at times, you may need to fight to get these aspects in to get the kid properly diagnosed. I am not a fan of diagnosing kids generally. I like to in this pathway. These are real live brain disorders. If we don't recognize them, label them, get on top of them early, it'll blow them out in adolescence, and it will completely destroy at least their young adult life, if not their whole adult life. So we're going to be looking at how do we figure out what is going on here. Then, probably after lunch, we are going to be looking at what do we do about it. You know, I'm going to introduce to you what's called a 7-step intervention approach, and each one builds upon the next. And for certain kids, you may be able to do it with step 1. With other kids, you're at step 7, go, isn't there an 8? So, you know, we'll be looking at what these steps are, and you'll have to be the judge of how far to go with each individual child. We'll talk about some home management techniques. That's where I'd really like a lot of, info from you too. But we'll talk about what works, what doesn't. We'll hit on biological interventions. And I say that carefully because by that I more or less mean medication. And my system, the mental health system, we want to sprinkle medications on everybody we see. And I look at a lot of kids, they're not on 1, they're not on 2, they're not on 3, but they're on 5, 6, 7, and 8 medications. If one doesn't work, it seems to be rather than take that one off, let's add another. And you have to be an intelligent consumer here. I know you don't get to control, who gets on what meds, but you're the ones who have to be monitoring. Is this helping? Now, I come from a long line of mentally ill people, and I swear to you, there are people who need to be on medications. A number of my relatives need to be on medications. And there's a number of Americans on medications. I'm just not certain of the overlap between those two populations, those that need it and those that are on it. There are good uses, and you need to be very aware of those. But you also need to know nothing comes for free. Are you getting enough bang for your buck here? And when this is coming at too high of a cost to the kid, we got to make loud noises, because there is a process to get them off. But it takes a lot of loud noises and pot banging and carrying on. And ultimately, you guys are the pot bangers. You're the ones who are going to have to do that. So we'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at resources. Because I will swear to you, no one of you, no matter how big of a red W or S you've got on your chest, can handle these kids all the time by yourself. Where do you get resources, help? One is look around the room. I loved it watching you come in. Most of you know each other. That's neat. You got a really good resource right among yourselves. But I'll try to tie you to some other ones out there too. So we'll talk about those. At the very end, don't panic, where it says there, exit exam, don't panic. This is not a dissertation. Because this is something you get credit for, I've got a brief little test that we're going to walk through together, so I guarantee you'll do just fine in it. But it's going to look at what are the high points out of today. I want you to fill out an evaluation. I've got those up here. I'll make sure those get scattered about through before this afternoon. It's real important to have the evaluation one so we know how to shape this. We need to know what is worth it to you and what is not. And on the evaluation tool, flip it over. There's 2 questions on the back that people tend to miss because I couldn't make it fit all on one page. So in that, make sure you turn it over. Okay, this is your brain plucked up out of your head. And we're going to be taking a look at how this works. While you're gazing at this lovely piece here, I want to read to you, and it's a very brief little thing here, so hang in with me. This is from Edward Halliwell. He is an MD, and he was asked, what is it like to have ADHD? And this is his response. It's like driving in the rain with bad windshield wipers. Everything is smudged and blurred, and you're speeding along, and it's really frustrating not being able to see very well. Or it's like listening to a radio station with a lot of static, and you have to strain to hear what's going on. Or it's like trying to build a house of cards in a dust storm. You have to build a structure to protect yourself from the wind before you can even start on the cards. In other ways, it's like being supercharged all the time. You get one idea and you have to act on it. And then what do you know? But you get another idea before you finished with that first one. And you go for that one. And of course, the third idea intercepts the second, and you have to follow that one. Pretty soon people are calling you disorganized, impulsive, and all sorts of impolite words that just miss the point completely because you are trying really hard. It's just that you have all these invisible vectors pulling you this way and that, and it makes it really hard to stay on task. Plus which, you're spilling over all the time. You're drumming your fingers, tapping your feet, humming a song, whistling, looking there, scratching, stretching, doodling, and people think you're not paying attention or that you're not interested. But all you're doing is spilling over so that you can pay attention. I pay a lot better attention when I'm taking a walk, listening to music, or even when I'm in a crowded, noisy room than I'm still and surrounded by silence. What's it like to have ADHD? Buzzing, being here, being there, and everywhere. Someone once said time is a thing that keeps everything from happening all at once. Time parcels out moments into separate bits so that we can do one thing at a time. In ADHD, this does not happen. In ADHD, time collapses. Time becomes a black hole. To you, it feels as though everything is happening at once. This creates an inner sense of turmoil or even panic. You lose perspective and the ability to prioritize. You're always on the go, trying to keep the world from caving in on top of you. Lines. You're incapable of waiting in lines. You just can't wait. That's the hell of it. Impulse leads to action. You're very short on that intermediate reflective step between impulse and action. That's why you lack tact. Tact is entirely dependent upon the ability to consider one's words before uttering them. We with ADHD don't do this too well. ADHD requires you to do a lot of adapting to get on in life, but it certainly can be done, and can be done very well. Now, I like that because it gives you an idea of what it's like to stand behind those other eyeballs. And I'm going to ask you repeatedly today to project yourself there. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to offer this class to the teachers that deal with our children? Because they're labeling our children as reckless, dangerous, erratic kids.
Yeah.
Even calling them psychotic.
It puts a shiver up my back. Teachers, I need to speak very respectfully of teachers. We ask them to do almost as much as we ask foster parents to do. But in that many do not have the resources they need. And the word psychosis with kids is being thrown around. It has a very specific meaning to me that does not work when you're talking about this kid who's pitching himself on the floor, biting the teacher, rolling around and spitting. You know, that's an out-of-control kid. That's not psychotic by my definition. But trying to get everybody on the same sheet of music is a real tough little thing. We'll talk about that a little bit in our 7-step intervention, because an IEP, an individualized educational program, is often going to be a lifesaver for these kids. And as much as I hate to label kids, that allows us to stay out of that loop and allows us to keep the person focused on this child, what's going on with them, without trying to put them into these big categories. But do teachers have enough support? Not at all. Enough training? No, ma'am. Am I doing ESD trainings? Yeah. But is it anywhere near enough? I don't think so. But they are trying to cope with 35 kids at once.
What if they're on not on an IEP and they're ADHD?
It depends on the individual child. If they're blowing out, then we need to get one established. And I will suggest to you, depending on the age of the child, if you don't get an IEP in elementary school, it is virtually impossible to get it in middle school and high school. And they will use that to blow that kid out of junior high and high school. And at least in districts I hang out with, they seem to be focused on how can we get problematic kids out of school, not how can we adapt the school or the kid to be able to fit the system. And if we have an IEP, they cannot expel them for being impulsive, off track, and unfocused. That's their disability. Any more than you can expel a spinal bifida child for not taking track. But without the IEP, some children do quite well. Others need that support. And if this is a shaky kid, I would really suggest get it in elementary school, because it's a lot easier and then you can carry them forward with you. It's much, much harder to initiate it in middle school or high school.
My child was expelled for the whole year and for his erratic behavior, but they said that they didn't have no documentation that this was his problem. And so I did some research and I found an IEP report from 2 years ago.
Outstanding.
And it definitely in their handwriting says the severe behavior of this child needs this setting. And as they got passed on, they kind of rewrote it to their advantage.
We will have to at least take an assumption, and I'm a cynic by nature, but I struggle hard to be an optimist. So we're going to have to take the assumption everybody's really trying to do the best they can with these kids. But I see paperwork get lost, get kind of rewritten, or maybe junior's behavior was better the next year and because of the IEP, and so they dropped that off, and now it comes back. But at Mythical School District, we fight a lot. Yes, ma'am? What the statement was is sometimes they're just not being honored, and that is correct. Again, Mythical School District out there, individual teacher by individual district, you will find that. That's where you as the step parent or the foster parent or the biological parent steps in and says, the IEP says, and it's a contract. My youngest child is not what I call an off-the-rack kid, the ones you can go in and buy at Walmart, the kind of the regular kids. She's kind of an interesting spin of reality. I could not get our small rural district to meet her needs. She needed support. They put an interpreter next to her. Now, I thought that was nice. Now, unfortunately, she didn't speak Spanish, but they had a bilingual interpreter next to her because that's what they had. Now, I said, good, teach her Spanish while she's there, but it seemed it wasn't going there. So sometimes it is because the district doesn't have what the child really needs, and sometimes because they just don't want to play. But again, we need to assume everybody wants to work to the benefit of this child. So you go in, and I do much better playing stupid. People believe that real easily of me. When I go, shucky darn, Junior's IEP says this is supposed to be happening, and it doesn't seem to be. Am I misunderstanding? And, people will believe they have to explain many things slowly to me. And when I'm going, but no, it says right here, and that's not happening. How do we fix this? You're going to have to be an advocate. First play softball, and if that doesn't work, then we play hardball. But I learned long ago you can't play hardball and back down and play softball. So start with softball, build it up, and if you need to bring in fast pitch, you do. But, that's where you're going to be monitoring. But let me jump back to the brain here for a second. There's a couple of things I want to point out, and then we're going to go into it. The brain stem down here, This then goes into the spinal cord. It's got a number of very interesting things in it. I don't want to make you neuroanatomists, so I'm going to make this very simplified, and I apologize to any neuroanatomists in the room because I'm going to make this incredibly simple. But you have an area down here called your reticular activating center or system, and it is, for our purposes today, a filter. It allows you to screen out all the extraneous information, the stuff you don't need, the hum from my machine, the flicker in the light, you know, the person sitting next to you. You focus in on that you're interested in by partly down here in the bottom of your brain. I think of this as a funnel, and we've got lots of information coming in and only a very small amount making it through that funnel. Now, not that any of you could ever relate to this, but when people smoke marijuana, that funnel opens out, which is why people smoking dope go, it seems like it's been forever, and it's been 5 minutes. And the reason that they go from thought to thought to thought to thought is because each one, instead of being filtered out, is being saying, and now you're next, and now you're next. And your internal way of measuring time, ADHD kids makes us nuts because they're never on time. Your internal time clock is right here. How do you know if it's been 5 minutes? How do you know if it's been an hour? How many bits of information have gone through your reticular activating system? You have a certain rate. Your brain knows you put through 30 bits in a minute. So every 30 bits should be a minute. Now go out and smoke dope and put through 30 bits in 30 seconds. You've just expanded your internal time sense. For the ADHD kid that you put in timeout for 2 minutes, his brain is putting 97 things through a second. He spent his day in timeout. You know, their sense of internal time is very, very different. And it's not a matter of look at the clock. You know, it's not that they can't tell time on the clock. Your internal sense of how long has this been sits right down here in the space of the brain. One of the main problems in ADHD, what I'll call primary ADHD, is a glitch right down here with this filter stuck wide open. Everything goes in as number one priority. No ability to screen out. You know, when you walk into those elementary school classrooms, they got everything everywhere, stuff hanging from the ceilings and things waving around, the kids just going, wow. You know, he can't focus on the teacher because that thing just moved. You know, as all this stuff is going on, he can't sort down here. So the brain stem's got a lot of interesting things going on for us down here. This little area over here called the cerebellum, this has as many neurons, brain cells in it, as the rest of your brain put together. This is an amazing little area we're just starting to figure out. And the autistic spectrum disorders, autism, Asperger's, sensory integration kinds of things, to the best of our current thinking, live right here. There's a problem here in how it's wired, in how the neurons developed. There's a lot more than they should be, but they're a little small and mature. So we know this part of the brain is implicated in the autistic spectrum kinds of disorders. We also have recently figured out this is a coprocessor in some way we don't know yet for the whole rest of the brain. So when you're using your frontal lobe up here to think with, you're co-processing with this part of the brain. We don't know how that quite works yet. So when you got glitches here, you're going to have glitches all the way through the brain in your ability to function, to control. So any of your kids who also have an Asperger's or an autism or a PDD, pervasive developmental disorder, sprinkled upon them, you've got global brain problems. This is the limbic system here in the center of your brain, kind of deep center. If you stuck your finger in there and your finger in there where they come together in your brain, is the limbic system. That is the site of all primitive arousal. Love, hate, fear, rage, lust, hunger, thirst, your need to go to the bathroom, all live right there in your limbic system. Now, this is a very primitive area of the brain. We share it with anything that can find its own mate and chase down its own food. When I talk to kids, I refer to that as lizard brain, because I have a very large iguana in my office. He's about 6.5 foot long. And we talk, the kids and I, about did you make that decision or did perhaps Marvin make that decision? Because Marvin only has limbic system. Marvin's interested in food, female iguanas, and laying in the sun. And some adolescents that I'm working with seem to be interested in pretty much the same thing. You know, what portion of the brain is going on here? This is a very important piece for your way of thinking. Separate from this piece, but I have to put in for you, every one of the kids that comes through your door has a potential of having a glitch here in the limbic system. Childhood stress, trauma, what I'm loosely going to call kiddie PTSD, post-traumatic stress. Every single kid that comes into your home, there's a reason they're coming into your home. Some of them huge, some of them smaller. When we perpetually stress out little kids, and this research is primarily Bruce Perry's and Bessel van der Kolk's, two separate researchers who come up with the same conclusion. When we perpetually stress little kids, think under a year, under 2, under 5, each one having different thumbprints, we're going to change permanently this piece of the brain. This piece of the brain constantly scans the environment for danger. You are wired to be afraid of two things. Something you've never seen before. Novel, you are wired to be afraid of. The other thing you're wired to be afraid of is anything that's been scary to you before. So you have two big pockets there, new and old known scary. Those wire in here. When we perpetually stress out a little kid, and domestic violence being one of the #1 things proven here, we permanently hyper-arouse this portion of the brain. This portion of the brain says run, fight, hide, eat, mate. That's what it knows how to do. When you are stressed out and scared, running might help, hiding might help, fighting might help, but I can think of very few things in the second grade classroom that run, fight, or hide is going to help. And all you're going to do is create more problems there. Hold that in your mind here for a second. We're going to come up here to the frontal lobe. Your eyeball sits right about here. If you stuck your finger up through your eyeball, you'd be coming up right through here. Frontal lobe, this whole front third of your brain. That's where you think from. Insight, judgment, impulse control. Now, I'm absolutely not a fan of Freud, but he got a couple of things right. But if there's an id, I want it, give it to me, I need it now, it lives right there. If there's a superego, put it down, you can't have it, spit it out, it lives right here. Now, these two portions of your brain are supposed to be in interactive communication all the time. I want it, wait. I'd like a drink, sit. You know, all those things that you learn to control your impulses. You learn you can't have immediate gratification. All of that lives right here. These two are at war a good deal of the time. Very tacky joke that I cannot tell you, but you might know the punchline. You only have enough blood to run one or two, one or the other at any given moment. If you are highly aroused here in the limbic system, you are angry. You are lustful. You are scared. This is all lit up. Bright white, hot and bothered. This turns a lovely Microsoft blue. It just goes to this nice little blue background saying nothing's happening. You ever been talking to somebody when they get angry and you see this thing slide down behind the back of their eyeballs? And you know, you can't hear me anymore, I might as well talk to the furniture. They are arousing in the limbic system and the frontal is going offline. When we perpetually stress and frighten a child, their brain wires to stay in the limbic system. Any trigger, including odors, #1 trigger for a PTSD meltdown, a smell. So the teacher who's wearing the same perfume as the lady who sexually assaulted the child catches a whiff, limbic system says, we're in trouble, frontal goes offline. Depending on that kid's personality, he stands up, throws the chair, screams, yells, hits, crawls underneath the table, shakes, wets his pants. You know, run, fight, hide. 3 things you know how to do. Yes, ma'am.
When the child's in that mode, they're keeping the child in
timeout 3 hours without contacting the parent.
No.
And this happened, 3 children in the same class. And I talked to the other parent. I'm like, something's got to be done because our children are not criminals and they shouldn't be in that timeout room for 3 hours, not even an hour.
There are good uses of timeout, particularly with some of these kids. But we want to think of them not as punitive. It's not about, doing time. I'm from Walla Walla, so I think about doing time, It's not about that. It's about break up the behavior. Give them a minute to kind of get their knees back under them and then get them back out. Rough rule of thought, 1 to 2 minutes per year of age of the child. Not with these kids. About a 2-minute timeout period. If they haven't got the grip of it by 2 minutes, try it again, maybe another 2-minute timeout. By the time you're doing 1 hour, 3 hours, 6-day timeout, it's not effective. Get the microphone.
And the door has an automatic lock that they're locking our children in there.
I don't even want to know the school district. I'll just stay up at night. And it's on my side of the mountains and in my RSN. Damn. Okay, ever happily forward. We're going to have to be thinking about these brains. All of your kids coming into your home, large or small, have some glitches going on here. Now, the good news is corrective experience, particularly very young, being able to be in a safe, predictable environment, you can make a huge difference in what's going to happen in this kiddo's brain. But before you let my system start calling them ADHD conduct disorder, ultra-rapid cycling juvenile onset bipolar disorder, don't let me start there. But before we let my system start calling them that, give them 180 days in a stable situation. Kick the stress down on them, and it's amazing a lot of that behavior goes away. Some of it won't, then we'll be looking at those kids. But my system is very fast to diagnose and very fast to medicate. Okay, back to the brain here. Frontal has got to be online. When we're looking at the ADHD brain, problem down here, too much information coming in, and the whole frontal is offline. It's a lovely blue color. It isn't working. So you have lizard brain getting a lot of info. Now what's also lit up is this area right here called the parietal lobe. That's your motor cortex. That's where you squirm and bounce and twitch and climb. You know the kid? Now I teach large groups of people, and when I have a theater kind of setting, one of the things I do to entertain myself is to pick out of the audience who I think was ADHD as a kid. And I can pick it out at least some of the people, and if I have a chance, I will, snag them at something, ADHD as a kid, and they go, what makes you think that, And very often what they have learned to do is rather than squirm and bounce and, get out of the chair and run all around, is they've put it into some aspect of their body. They'll tap a finger, I'll see feet, lots of feet going, people could fly with those things. What you have learned to do is control. But that's because your ability to use your frontal gets better and better and better from about 16 on. There is a biological reason for that. And most of you look over 16, so you've got a pretty well-developed frontal lobe. Now, we know in ADHD, problem in the brainstem, problem up in the frontal lobe. This area here is called the corpus callosum. This is what allows the two halves of your brain to talk to each other. Without that, literally, the left side would not know what the right side was doing. In fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, there's a couple of pathways that are going to be problematic to us, but one of them is the corpus callosum here frequently fails to develop correctly. In extreme cases, doesn't develop at all. And quite literally, they cannot integrate the two halves of their brain. Your ability to feel an emotion and name it correctly requires you to integrate the two halves of your brain. Your ability to see the water bottle and know it's a water bottle, have the name for it, requires both halves of your brain. If that isn't working right, none of this will work right. These are neurons, these are brain cells. You have somewhere around 100 billion with a B of these stuffed into your brain. And I'm going to hit them real quick because the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, part of the other problem is here. These are, there's many kinds, but they all have a basic structure. They've got a cell body in the middle, and for you CSI fans, that's where the DNA and the RNA and all those cool things they're looking for are here in the cell body. Coming out of the cell body are things called dendrites. Think of them as antennae. They go out looking for other neurons. And in a really nicely myelinated brain, well put together, it looks like a Seattle street map. You know, there's all these little lines going everywhere. They go out and meet up with other neurons. Each one of your 100 billion neurons has around 10,000 connections. Now, that's beyond my ability to handle zeros once you get out to that level. Many of us prune, i.e., if you don't use it, you lose it. I took French for 4 years. I don't think I could struggle through a sentence at this moment because I think all my French dendrites shriveled up and went away. But dendrites bring in information to the cell body. And when enough dendrites tell this cell body, do something, fire, stop firing, it sends an electrical message down one axon. One axon leaves the cell. It can break up into a zillion little pieces out here, but just one goes out of the cell body. What makes this one fire might be very different than what makes that one fire, but we come down here to little endpoints, and then you have a little tiny gap called a synaptic gap or clep that you have to have the message go across to the next cell. The way you communicate in the brain is like that old game of telephone. If I came over and whispered something into this nice person's ear and said, tell it all the way around, and we get to the end and say, all right, how'd it come out? Remember how fun that game was? Because it came out very different at the other end. You better hope they play telephone better than we do, because when that message gets glitched up, then we got problems. Your brain doesn't understand, doesn't interpret, can't do what you want it to do. In fetal alcohol, several of the problems that we know happen, scattered throughout the brain, these dendrites don't form right. Instead of branching out and reaching out like that to hook up with all these other things that are coming out here to meet them, they overgrow and they wrap around the soma and cell body. It looks a lot like a blackberry bush. It's all tangled and wrapped around. And so you have all these other neurons coming in saying, I'm here to meet the dendrite, and the dendrite's not there. And we have scattered areas throughout the brain where we have a whole bunch of neurons together that are damaged. They didn't form right at the time that the brain was forming. And depending on where those areas are, how many there are, will be the difference in the range of the disorder. So it isn't as though all kids are going to fit one size here, but it has to do with how the neurons form.
If you suspect a child of this one here, the alcohol syndrome, and or maybe the drugs and alcohol, and they present themselves as that, and they're underweight, they're smaller, they're about a year and a half behind.
Yeah.
They get characteristics. Okay, and but you take them to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, the nose isn't flat, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, the ears and all that. Should you take him in for a scan at the age of 4, which is a year and a half behind, so he wouldn't be mentally poor?
It is very easy to miss fetal alcohol syndrome. We're going to hit this a little harder in just a couple minutes, but let me answer it a little bit here. Part of the difference between the old labels that I tend to still have in my lexicon, so it seems to come out my mouth, which shouldn't, is FAS and FAE, fetal alcohol syndrome and fetal alcohol effect. In the old way of looking at it, the fetal alcohol syndrome kid is what I will very nastily call an FLK, a funny-looking kid. Their nose is wrong, their eyes are wrong, their ears are low set, they look like something's wrong there. That was a fetal alcohol syndrome, full syndrome, versus fetal alcohol effect. The child's lightweight, intellectually impaired, impulse impaired, but facially, bodily, looks okay. It used to be thought it was a lighter weight. It is not. It has to do with when the alcohol was doing the damage. The face is formed in the first trimester. The brain is formed all the way through, and I'll tell you, until your early 20s, your brain is actively forming. But gestationally, it is actively developing all the way through the pregnancy. It is the only organ that is actively developing all the way through. So in all likelihood, if you're seeing all the other characteristics, and the doc looked and says, he's not an FLK, he can't be, yes, he can. Where I would suggest you go, and we'll hit this harder in just a little bit, is through the University of Washington's, and they have their fetal alcohol and drug unit. They have what I'll call their dog and pony show that they bring to this side of the mountains. Call them, schedule with them. That's the only negative about their program, is they got a waiting list to get the kid evaluated. But they are the absolute top in it, and just because the kid doesn't look fetal alcohol, unfortunately, does not mean they're not.
Okay, would that have anything to do with the top of the cartilage still being stuck to the head?
Yeah. Yeah, it most certainly could. Ear and nose differentials, cartilage. Cartilage forms differently. It's very soft, and we know that that's impaired. Cartilage forms, breastbone, fingers, lots of the things where cartilage is in little kids are formed incorrectly when it's gestated in alcohol. But let me push on just a little bit. We'll hit a lot of that. Couple of pieces I want to point out. This is your brain, once again, cut out. And then the limbic system is pulled out here. Two real important pieces I want to point to here. You got hippocampus, and you got one on each side. Your hippocampus is associated with immediate memory, with being able to learn something. Anything you learned today first went in through there and then got routed out and probably stored here on the sides of your head in your temporal lobes, where your longer-term memory lives. Short-term immediate memory is here, so is trauma memory. Things that go in without words. And when little kids are terrified, they don't have words. It goes in what we call iconically. What did it look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, taste like? That's stored here. You can't pull it up with a word. You pull it up with an image or a smell or the same touch or the same feel. That opens up the memory. These are not working well in ADHD kids. Their ability to learn, to bring things in, can be really impaired if these aren't online. In kids who have been traumatized, again drawing from Bruce Perry and Bessel van der Kolk's work, normed on 5-year-olds who came out of domestic violence situations, they have up to a 1/3 smaller hippocampus than they should. And that will permanently impair this child's learning and memory ability. Doesn't mean they can't. It will just be much, much harder for them to do so. The other thing I want to point out to are the amygdalas. One again on each side, about almond size in shape, sit kind of, they're really on the basal ganglia, but they look like they're on the end of the hippocampus. These are where fear and rage come from. To the best of our current understanding, fear and rage live right there. And that's why they're so easily interchangeable, is because they exist in the same spot in the brain. Now, young men, when they're beginning to hit testosterone, I raised my son and said he was such a neat kid, and then his brain just melted out of his ears when he hit about 13, and it didn't seem to show up again until he was about 17. And I went through saying testosterone poisoning. And you know what? I was right. Testosterone, major male hormone, is a neurotoxin. It kills brain cells. Think 13, 14, 15. He's got 2 to 3 times the amount of testosterone that he will have as an adult male. When you put testosterone at huge levels, like steroids, some people use steroids, and we have what we call roid rage, the huge acting out. Any kind of steroid like testosterone, a natural or artificial, crank up the amygdala. And the young man walks around what my husband refers to as a Maypop. That's a tire with no tread. Get it hot, it's going to explode. This kid is ready to pop at any instant. You say, good morning, and he says, what do you mean by that? You know, not a thing. I didn't mean a thing. That's because his amygdalas are half glowing all the time. It takes very, very little to pop this kid. At an ADHD diagnosis, poor impulse control, high levels of testosterone, and we have warm nitroglycerin that we are shaking as we are walking along here. I'm doing all this not just to bore you out of your mind with brain stuff, but to tell you there's very important differentials going on here. Judgment. That we want the kid to do with ADHD, the litany. Stop, think, choose, act. Stop, think, choose. All here. All offline. Act back here. Oh, all lit up, ready to go. So asking them to do those first three things, almost impossible for these guys. This is a SPECT scan, and if I can figure out and not mess up the thing here, thank you. Just quickly to be able to see, this is a regular SPECT scan, specific positron electronic computerized tomography. I know you're dying to know that one too. This is what Eamon is now doing. This is a regular brain being scoped. It looks kind of all fluffy and like a cotton ball there. Here's your frontal lobe, cerebellum down here. This is temporal hanging down. That's the way it's supposed to look. Color doesn't have a lot to do with this particular scan. What we're looking at is the shape and how fluffy that is. That's what a brain is supposed to look like. Hold that in your head. And we can kick that light. Thank you. All right. Now with that as an underpinning, let's move into this. I like Dennis the Menace. I like humor anyway, but Dennis says, by the time I think about what I'm going to do, I already did it. That's that act before stop, think, and choose. Because that part of their brain just flat is not online. In your handout, you have a copy of the ADHD Criteria. I just want to show you this quick little picture. This is a SPECT scan looking at a brain from the bottom up. This is the frontal lobe up here. Notice the great big holes in the frontal lobe. Where there are holes mean there is no metabolism happening there, which means no sugar, no oxygen. To the best of my use, the brain is not turned on in that spot. He is physically incapable of stopping, thinking, choosing because the brakes are not there. Okay, hold these pictures in your mind. This is that same brain trying to concentrate. You ever notice with an ADHD child, the harder they try, the worse it gets? See how big these holes just became? And for us to go, concentrate, concentrate, try, come on. All we're doing is digging bigger holes in this brain. This is real. This is not something that you can make your brain do. Okay, you have this criteria in your handout. This is what the DSM uses to decide if this child is ADHD. We have combined attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity attention deficit disorder. So if you were ever diagnosed with ADD, congratulations, you no longer have a disability because that no longer exists. You are, however, ADHD primary inattentive type. Isn't that easier to say and easier to hold on to? What they discovered, or at least are putting out there, is that ADHD actually is a continuum. And about 85% of people follow a very specific pattern through that continuum. About 15% don't study, don't do it right, and I think we ought to be teaching this in school so they do it right. But they may stick somewhere in the pattern or they may not follow it. But we are first looking for either, number one, signs of inattention, or number two, that will be hyperactivity, impulsivity. Now, we need 6 or more of the criteria, and they need to have persisted for at least 6 months. Now, I need to put this out because it isn't the kid just came into your house, has been there for 2 weeks, and is bouncing off the walls. He may indeed be doing that, but we need to wait out there 180 days and see is he still doing this. Has it persisted? Because most kids, pick them up, move them around, you get agitation. You get them acting out. But at least 6 months, to a degree that is maladaptive, it's causing problems, and inconsistent with developmental level. And so you have to look at the kid and say, how much do we expect from this child? Now, how my family laid out, I got like a 15-year difference between my oldest child and my youngest child. And when I took my oldest child to kindergarten, we didn't have to pre-test or anything, he just showed up. He's 5, here you go. They were thrilled. He could pick his mommy out of the crowd of other mommies. He knew his name and he could take himself independently to the bathroom. They were just thrilled with my son. All righty, I felt good about this. 15 years later, we had to pre-test before we could put her into kindergarten. And I'm an old-fashioned parent. We believe we made it. We should raise it. So she didn't spend a lot of time in daycare or preschools or that. She kind of lived with us, you know, and maybe we aren't that stimulating. So I took her in, and they said, well, can she read or write? And I said, well, she knows her name, and she knows at least 20 out of the 26 letters fairly reliably, and 12 colors. And they went, oh. Does she add or subtract? And I said, no. But she can count to 10 in 2 languages. And they went, oh. I said, well, maybe we can catch her up. I'm saying, wonderful. I thought that's what you went to school to do. To a certain degree, we have shifted what do we expect from little kids. And certainly some children are capable of marvelous things. One of my children was reading at 2. She's just an odd duck. One started reading at 8. You know, I think they're all generally normal. But where do our expectations lie? And when you want your kid doing higher math by age 5, we may be having unrealistic expectations. So considering the developmental level of the child, how far should they be? Are they head and shoulders above all the other kids? And then we're going to be looking at things like they fail to give close attention to things, details. Remember in early elementary where you bring home the homework where half of them are multiple or addition and half are subtraction? And the kid will go through and they'll do them whatever that first sign was. If the first one was addition, they'll do the whole page of addition because it's just too hard to check each problem what they want. You know, it's annoying. As one of my children said, they should just put them all on the same sheet. You want a subtraction sheet? Give me a subtraction sheet. I'm saying, well, no, look at the sign. And he just looks at me, you know. So they fail to give close attention. They have difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or even in play, except video games. You cannot count their ability to be on level 9,000 of a video game. Look at those things. There are 12 billion things going on. That is entertainment city staring at that thing. There's lights and bells and whistles and zingers and all that. That gives their brain 42 different things to go to. They're not focusing on one thing. They do not seem to listen when spoken to. All my children were ADHD. They do not follow through on instructions, chores, duties. And this isn't because of their being oppositional. No, I won't. Or they don't understand how to do it. They just dribble it off. You know, they went to take the garbage and it kind of dribbled and then they set it down and they went to do something else. And they just kind of got distracted as they were going. They have difficulty organizing their tasks, their activities. My youngest is now in 4th grade and she's just now having to put together a report. You know, go into the internet, get information, put it on a piece of paper. This is a big step for her to have to gather something, organize it, and produce it in another thing. They avoid, dislike, or reluctant to do those things that require them to focus or concentrate. I don't like to read. I don't like math. It's hard. Yep, it is. But that's the piece. They'll try to squirm their way out of any of it. They lose things. They lose everything. They're distracted by everything, and they're forgetful in their daily activities. So you're looking for at least 6 of those that have gone on all at the same time for at least 6 months, that you look and say, out of all the 5-year-olds, he's that much bigger and better than everybody else. So you're looking and you say, if I got 6 of those, then you check off and say, we got inattention. But wait, you're not done. You move on then to 6 or more of the following symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity. Same 6 months, same above and beyond the developmental level. And now we're looking for, they fidget, they squirm. Now, I went in to read Dr. Seuss in the first grade classroom on, reading week, and I looked at this teacher who's going, oh yeah, it's wonderful. And she's got like 26 kids that I'm reading to. I'm doing, green eggs and ham. They're turning flips in their chairs. I'm thinking, she's got a room full of ADHD kids. She goes, no, they're all normal. It's fine. And I was going, oh, God, lady. But when you look at it, how long do you expect a 6-year-old to sit? How long, so you got to be thinking realistically. And for adults, that just a minute is usually 20 that, we want them to sit there, and it doesn't work out so well. They leave the seat when they're supposed to remain in their chair. They climb, they run. I have a friend who had her first baby at 40, and I think this is wonderful. World's first baby, most desired thing ever. She called me a few months ago and said, he's 9 months old, and he not only walks, he runs. I said, oh boy, hope that works out for you. Because very often ADHD kids are early runners, early climbers, early jumpers. And one thing I tell CPS workers when I train them, when we see a spiral break, break in a circle, the CPS's belief is immediately somebody took it and twisted it, because that is the classic way you get a spinal break. Except with an ADHD child. They're the ones who can climb the dresser, stick their foot in the drawer, fall down, and spin while they're dropping. So I plead with them to remember, if this is a hyper kid, they can spiral fracture something without anybody having grabbed it and twisted it. They have difficulty playing in anything quietly. They can't sit and color in the book, read it, they can't even do hand games frequently. That won't hold them very long. They're always on the go, driven by a motor. I had one guy say somebody put the quarter in him, and he's just going and going. Little girls often hit on this one more than little boys. They talk excessively. I had one of my kids would go to sleep talking, would wake up talking. I had thoughts that she probably did it all night, too. I just have the heart to go in there and find out. We're also 6 across, including the impulsivity. They blurt out answers before the question's even been asked. They have difficulty waiting in turns. They butt in. They intrude. They interrupt. Now, again, all kids can hit at least 6 of these, but we're looking, is it bigger, better than anybody else around there? Some of these symptoms need to have been present before age 7. It doesn't need to have been diagnosed, but you need to be able to say, this was back there. If this suddenly started at age 9, I swear to you it is not ADHD. Something else is going on with that kid. But usually it will be, oh yes, he was an active baby. He was, all these things. Some impairment is present in at least 2 settings. I will tell you, if it's a true ADHD child, you will see it in every setting. Some settings handle it better. Some settings are more conducive to how that kid functions. So when grandma says, well, he's no problem at my house, that may be speaking to her ability to handle him, or her ability to say, sure, honey, play video games and eat donuts, whatever. It is her environment, as opposed to that kid is not ADHD. But a true ADHD child, you're going to see it slopping into almost every setting, if not every setting. If it is only at the school, at the community club, there is a problem in the environment between the kid and something going on there. If it doesn't slop over everywhere, find out.
Does trauma, you talked about trauma in the brain, does that or can that cause ADHD as well? Is that what you were saying?
Let me draw you a little picture here. Does it cause ADHD? No. Does it look like ADHD? Yes. And let me show you why I'm not an artist. Okay. Here's your brain, limbic system there. When you have the limbic system all aroused, this kid is terrified or they're angry, this whole system goes offline. Therefore, they squirm, they bounce, they forget, they can't focus. All of that lives up here.
Does that also shut them down?
Down emotionally? Very often, yes.
Where there's no response?
Two things you can do.
Look at you?
Fight, hide. Hide is, I use the word carefully, dissociate.
Right, just look at you.
You know, and they shut off. There's no emotion. You might as well, you know, have a little statue in front of you. Right. Their eyes are dead. Their emotions are dead. They are totally absorbed here. This is all gone. And it's a defense mechanism. You know, it usually comes out of inescapable, painful kinds of abuses. If you can't run and you can't fight, you hide. And you hide by shutting off. All of us carry that capability. Most of us didn't have to hone it as a little kid. If you hone that as a little kid, it's in your pocket as you go forward and may not be in your control. You may dissociate, you may shut down when you don't want to. But when this is aroused, and you're going to run, fight, hide, depending on your personality and the situation, this is completely offline. The classic ADHD brain, this is completely offline. They look the same. You put a stimulant-based med into this brain, you will make them psychotic. They will run up the wall, they will scream, they will hallucinate, they will beat themselves and others. And that's because we are taking this system and cranking it up beyond belief. In the true ADHD brain, a stimulant turns on the frontal lobe. So, yes, that trauma brain can look ADHD. Is it? No. And when we treat it as it is, we're going to do that kid damage. Okay, there must be clear evidence of clinically significant impairment in something. And again, this is where, is it an overactive kid or an underactive parent? You know, I'm a working parent. I've always been. I would come home to literally 6 kids in the household and just go, oh, good God. You know, I just want to sit down. I just want to, you know, focus on something else. I want happy people around me. I just came off of crisis. My kids are, okay, smile, mom's home. She doesn't want to say anything stressful, you know. When you're looking at little kids, you want them to sit in a row and you know, play nice with each other. What if they don't do that? Does that make them hyperactive or are you underactive? So we got to be looking, is this a realistic level? When the parent says, but I want my child reading it too, and they're not, there's something wrong. No, they're a regular kid. So there has to be clinically significant evidence of something. And then here are all our excluders. If they have a pervasive developmental disorder, autism, Asperger's, that doesn't mean they can't have ADHD, but they sit so closely together that the symptoms can be confused, just like that. Schizophrenia, psychotic disorders, anxiety disorders, dissociative personality, you know, the whole book here. I will tell you, look for trauma, you know, number one, and if we can account for that, wrap around that, I think we're going to pull at least a percentage out. In my guess, somewhere around 20% are being inappropriately called ADHD, when really what we've got is trauma brain going on. Once you have met criteria, the way the clinicians are supposed to do it is every 6 months, we're supposed to be looking at the preceding 6 months. What did it look like? Are they still meeting these categories? Because a huge number of people will follow this little spectrum in which in the early years, think 0 to about 5 or 6, about the time they go into school, they tend to be hyperactive. You know, they meet at least 6, if not all, of those hyperactive impulsivity kinds of things. And they may not meet the inattention, because how much do we require little kids to focus? You know, how can we tell how well they follow through on a task? They're 2. You know, so from that standpoint, little itty-bitty kids, we're more likely to see the hyperspectrum. Think elementary school years, somewhere from 5 or 6 out here to 11 or 12. And I will tell you, this point here is puberty. When that child's body individually decides it wants to do puberty. For young ladies, it may be as early as 8 or as late as 16, and that's all normal. There's a huge range of menarche right now of when young ladies' menstrual periods start. So Think of this switching when they switch into adolescence. During elementary school years, roughly think combined. They are both ADHD, hyperactive, and inattentive. They're just doing great at this point. Once adolescence hits, what we see is decreasing hyperactivity. We used to think it went away. It doesn't. It goes underground. The squirmy, bouncy, out of control, the ability to sit in the chair has improved because they spent 6 years in school learning sit in the chair. That may be all they learned, but they learned to sit in the chair. So now hyperactivity is going down, but what is coming up is inattention. And we are asking teenagers at this point to do more than I've ever wanted to do. Multitasking. You know, you got to have 3 sports and 2 activities. If you're going to college, you got to have these classes and that. You're taking run and starts. You got to be at this school. Got all these things going on. We're asking them to multitask, pull this together at a point when their brain is not ready generally, and these folks are going to bomb out badly. The more and more we start putting, think about middle school on, you know, roughly 8th through 12th grade, they're going to be bombing badly, depending on how much inattention's going. And the really bad news is if you were correctly diagnosed back here as ADHD, there's about an 80% likelihood that you're still ADHD out here at 105. What you will see is inattentive. And before we take a break, I want to just put in one little thought in your head. You as foster parents have to handle a horrible thing. The kid gets ready for a visit. You go through all the gyrations of parents going to come visit, and the parent doesn't show up. And then you get to mop up behind that, and 3 days later they have the audacity to call and say, I want to see him now. And you say, and I want to pinch your little eyeballs together. If you got an ADHD kid, there's about a 50-50 shot you got an ADHD parent. They aren't blowing this off. It fell out their brain. They meant to be there, but they were in the other spot, and they couldn't get back to this one, and it isn't that they don't love their kids. It isn't that they don't care. But they have the same brain their kid has, and they're usually not on medications or treatment, and it just kind of dribbles out their ear. Doesn't make your life any easier, but it might make you slightly more charitable in your thought.